Super Tuesday. A third of American states are voting today, including California and Texas. This could well today decide whether it's going to be Bernie or Joe Biden that faces Donald Trump in the November presidential elections. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about some quite dramatic financial news in America in response to the stock market fall and coronavirus. But here in the United Kingdom, the long-anticipated press conference following the Cobra meeting yesterday by Boris Johnson. Let's hear Boris Johnson this morning on the crisis.
Today we've published the Coronavirus Action Plan, setting out how all four parts of the UK will take all necessary and reasonable steps to prepare for and tackle this outbreak. And the plan has four strands: containing the virus, delaying its spread, researching its origins and cure, and finally mitigating the impact should the virus become more widespread. That is, contain, delay, research, mitigate.
And he went on to say, we will get through this.
Our country remains extremely well prepared, as it has been since the outbreak began in Wuhan several months ago. Finally, crucially, we must not forget what we can all do to fight this virus, which is to wash our hands. You knew I was going to say this, but wash our hands with soap and water. And forgive me for repeating this, but there will be people first tuning into this for the first time. Wash your hands with soap and hot water for the length of time it takes to sing Happy Birthday.
What about the national anthem, Prime Minister?
It's simple advice, but it's the single most important thing we can do, as I think our experts would attest. But at this stage, and with the exception of all the points that I have just mentioned, I want to stress that for the vast majority of the people of this country, we should be going about our business as usual.
That was reassurance there from the Prime Minister. He says, wash your hands for as long as it takes to sing Happy Birthday. Jacob Rees-Mogg did suggest the national anthem, but hey. So there was Boris Johnson, no doubt fortified by a good English breakfast, which seems to be the norm now for this government when it does anything, at trying to be reassuring. So the government are prepared for, if this was to get really serious, for police to concentrate on responding to serious crimes only. They're ready to lose a significant amount of staff to illness. They say we've got stockpiles of medicines in the NHS, plus protective clothing and equipment for staff. Essential services by the NHS will be provided for those most at risk. Even the Ministry of Defence would provide support if and when they were needed. There would be increased government communication with Parliament, the public and the media. They could even, if it really comes to it, go for social distancing strategies, which would mean school closures, home working, reducing the number of large-scale gatherings. That could mean Six Nations rugby, it could mean football matches, and goodness knows what else. They're prepared for up to a fifth of the workforce to be off and perhaps working from home. Non-urgent operations and procedures will be cancelled, as hospitals will be freed to look up emergency situations. And all in all, I guess they're getting ready for the worst case scenario. That's what really came out of that press conference today. Is it enough? Is it good enough? Is it really professional? Well, I'm joined now by Chris Smith, medical consultant specialising in clinical microbiology and virology at Cambridge University and its teaching hospital, Addenbrooke's. He also presents the Naked Scientist podcast. Chris, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Did you think the Prime Minister did enough today?
I've read the document, or at least I tried to. It actually, I felt it was a bit vague, if I'm honest. The beginning's very good. The background information, the nice references, etc. It's very useful for a virologist like me. I thought it was a good summary. I then approached it as though I was thinking, well, if I were a parent and I had, say, a child in a class with another kid who might have some symptoms, what should I take away from this? And there's nothing there. So I think that there are some vague areas of this that probably do need a bit of strengthening. I think what he's probably trying to do is get behind everyone and say, look, we're prepared, but don't panic. Because at the moment, I think there is an element of media hysteria going on. I think that people are doing things like panic buying. And it's not just us here in Britain. I was talking to somebody in New Zealand last week when New Zealand declared its first case of coronavirus detected on New Zealand territory, and the shops immediately emptied, not of people, but of toilet paper. And people are panic buying bog rolls, So there is an element of hysteria, and I think they're trying to sort of say, look, we are prepared, we have got a plan in place. Don't panic.
I was told by my son in Hong Kong that loo rolls were the most sought-after commodity there right at this moment in time. So there's a certain commonality with that. Yeah, and people are concerned, and they're changing their behaviour, and they're cancelling flights and all the rest of it. One point that really strikes me, Chris, and I flew in to Heathrow from America this Sunday morning, and Christine on Twitter says to me, we still haven't seen proper checks at airports. Why are we not screening people as they arrive? Would it be practicable and possible to screen people flying in for, say, Italy or somewhere like that?
Well, actually, the way in which we would screen people would be probably to look at people who are symptomatic. Now, that's already happening at source, because if you're really overtly symptomatic, they're not going to let you on the aeroplane in the first place. So we're comfortable that we're not boarding onto planes people who are overtly symptomatic. And if they're overtly symptomatic, the more symptoms you have, probably the more virus you have, and therefore the more of a threat you have to pose to other people. So in that respect, I'm comfortable. It's a little bit of a misnomer to say, well, look, we'll screen people coming off the aeroplane, because that presupposes people are going to come with a pre-made mark on their forehead saying, I've got coronavirus. That is not how it works, because there is an incubation period. The median incubation period, about 4 days. It might be as long as 11 days. And therefore, people who get on the plane, especially with a short-haul flight, they're not necessarily going to become symptomatic during that flight. So it probably would impose more of an obstacle, holding people up, screening people for very little gain. Actually, flying is quite useful, because we know who the people are, where they've come from, and we ultimately know identities of people through passport records, making it more easy to track people down afterwards, which is what the system has done to date. So actually, I'm not so worried about that. I'm more worried about the fact that, we're worrying about perhaps shutting the back door and leaving the front door wide open, because people are saying, well, let's shut, like Australia have, flights from China or flights from other affected territories. Actually, if you look at the case of the guy who went to Singapore, caught it there, went to a skiing chalet in the Alps, infected a bunch of people there, those people who came back from the Alps would have been lost to follow-up, because they were not coming in through routes from territories which were regarded as at risk. So we're sort of having our eye fixated on one thing, and we're ignoring what's coming in through the back door. So one has to be careful.
That's fair. And one of the reassurances that Boris Johnson tried to give today was to say the UK has stockpiles of medicines. Does medicine actually cure the coronavirus, or just make people feel better?
No, I mean, we don't have any. I mean, as a planet, the human race has no medicines and no vaccines against this particular agent at the moment. That we're hoping to change, because there are scientists all over the world, thanks to funding which has been unlocked by the UK government and other governments and organisations like the World Health Organization for rapid response. They're trying to make a vaccine, and we have some track record of being able to do this in this sort of space, but it does take time. So that's one thing they're doing. The other is that people are saying, well, although this is a novel virus, it does have some things and some features and some behaviours which are in common with other viruses. So why don't we take some of the drugs we've got which work against other viruses in similar sorts of ways and just try them? They're already licensed. We understand their side effects. We understand their safety track record. So we could just try them. We haven't got much to lose. They're trying that. It's a higher risk strategy and it has a high likelihood of failing, but they're trying it. And there are some other antiviral drugs which were spawned by the Ebola outbreak. And although Ebola, again, very different virus, but there do happen to be some commonalities between this and coronavirus. Some of these drugs we've now got from that outbreak might just work. So people are working on this, but the mainstay of treating this is supportive management. And what that means is if a person pitches up in hospital extremely unwell, you have to support the functions that are currently failing them. And most of the time, by and large, that's going to be their respiratory system.
Now, there's been much talk about vaccines. President Trump talking about fast-tracking vaccines, but certainly previous experts I've spoken to say that will take months or perhaps even until the end of this year. But there is something, Chris, isn't there, where sometimes these viruses emerge and we develop a herd immunity against them. Is that the most likely outcome given the history of viruses?
Well, with this one, it's very, very good at spreading. It's probably about twice as good at spreading through humans as the flu is. And the flu entrenches itself in the human population and then circulates year after year, evolving slowly as it does so. So this virus is probably, I'd say the natural outcome for this is it's going to establish itself and become, alongside the existing 4 natural winter coronaviruses that come and give us seasonal colds and things, another one of them. So there are currently 6 coronaviruses that infect humans. One of them's SARS, which luckily hasn't come back. Another one's one called MERS-CoV, which is in camels and bats and occasionally people in the Middle East. That emerged in 2012. And then there are 4 fairly repetitive, fairly common human coronaviruses. This would bring the total to 7, and because of its infectivity profile and its good adaptation to humans, I'd say it's very likely the natural outcome for this is it will just become a circulating virus in that coronavirus family.
And if we get it and we recover from it, does that mean we can't get it again?
It's likely that that's the case, but we don't know, because at the moment we haven't actually got enough data. But usually when you have an acute infection like this, what happens is that the body learns to recognise the thing that's been assailing it. It mounts a protective immune response, which involves making antibodies, which are shaped like a letter Y, bits of sticky protein, which basically clog up the works of things that try to invade you the next time. So if the same thing comes back again, you decorate them with these antibodies and it stops them working. So you should be protected. That said, you can never say never in medicine, because until we get the full measure of this thing and we understand it more thoroughly, we can't say for certain, but the likelihood is that's how it'll work.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris Smith, for joining us. Do come back and speak to us again as this story unfolds. And that was Chris Smith, medical consultant specialising in clinical microbiology and virology at Cambridge University and its teaching hospital, Addenbrooke's. He also presents the Naked Scientist podcast. So the Prime Minister today tried to give us assurance, and there he was with the government's chief scientific officer, the government's chief medical officer. I have to say, on the technical questions, Boris couldn't answer any of them, but then, he's not a scientist, is he? So there's no reason why he could. Did his remarks today provide you with some reassurance that the government is on top of this, that the government has got a plan? I think, on balance, it did. But it's very, very difficult for them to know. I guess when they talk about up to a fifth of the workforce being at home, when they talk about the police only dealing with very serious crimes, does that spread a bit of fear, or does it show they're actually getting ready for the worst case scenario? In life, businesses, people have to have a plan B in case things go badly wrong. I think on balance today, it was pretty competent. Tell me what you think. 0345 6060 973. It's 6:15. Time for the coronavirus in the United Kingdom. And by the way, if you want to follow the news on this, there's a live blog up and running giving you all the latest updates. Visit lbc.co.uk. You'll get all the up-to-date news there. Boris Johnson, big press conference this morning, flanked by the chief scientific officer and by the chief medical officer. And Boris says we are prepared in every way for whatever comes. And I'm asking you, are you reassured? I was mildly reassured. Quite to what extent they thought this through, I don't know. But at least they are thinking about it. I just wish they'd do something about the economy, because fine, they're thinking about what would happen health-wise, and sure, cancelling non-urgent operations. I mean, I kind of understand that. Although telling people that the police would only deal with serious crimes in a situation like that, well, it's not quite a looter's charter, but I did wonder whether that was actually a very good message to put out. Let's go to Sarah, who's a new caller from Purley. Sarah, good evening.
Good evening. Hi.
So were you reassured by our statesman-like Prime Minister today?
I have to say I wasn't, no. I mean,
Oh, dear.
I'm quite prepared. I've got my supplies in and I've got some hand sanitizer, etc. He said, I'm a teacher and a parent, and I'm telling you right now, I will not be going to work if a child has been in my classroom with suspected coronavirus till the entire school's been cleaned out, And the thing that I'm concerned about is there seems to be a lot of Boris fluff. Lots of words.
Well, we're used to that.
I'm wondering what tangible things have actually happened. So, for example, have people all over the place been supplied with hand sanitizer? I'm wondering, Boris promised us these 10 new hospitals. I think maybe now might be a good time to start building one.
Actually, 40 hospitals he talked about.
Sorry, was it 40?
But I think it was a little stretching the numbers. Sarah, tell me, what age group are you teaching?
I teach in a secondary school.
Right, and you perhaps have less interaction with parents at that age than he would if it was a primary school. But do you get? I mean, what impression do you? I mean, you're a parent. You're a parent too. I mean, what would you do with your child if somebody in the school had got coronavirus? Would you take them out before the school said you had to?
I think so, yes, because I don't think this is an unknown thing. I know that at the moment it looks like not many younger kids have died, but some have. And I think we're all parents. We don't want that person to be our child. We don't want anybody's child to be ill, but we certainly don't want to put our children at risk. And I mean, the sort of questions I've got in my mind as a parent aren't should I be singing Happy Birthday or washing my hands. They're things like, if anyone gets ill, will anyone pick up the phone? Will there be space in a hospital? I think the idea that older, more vulnerable people who used to be doctors would want to be in the hospital in a very dangerous environment, I think is quite ridiculous.
Well, this is a very interesting... No, Sarah, this is a point you raise. I mean, Dawn says to me on Facebook, surely they can't make retired health workers go back to work anyway because their age group would be a high-risk group. And that's very much the point you're making, isn't it?
Well, it is. I just think that, I mean, my parents, are 77 and 76, and, they didn't used to be doctors, but, I mean, the idea that they should be going on the front line like that, and putting themselves in danger, if they were doctors, I just think it's shocking. I mean, I was telling my mum, please don't go anywhere crowded, please stay at home, please look after yourself. All the advice, I've been telling her, she can't get any hand sanitizer. I found out how to make it yourself, so I said, you can buy these things.
Sarah, what's wrong with soap?
Well, the thing is, it's all very well if you can get to a sink, isn't it? But I was just thinking, I think you need your own little thing.
All right, fine. Sarah, I understand your concerns as a teacher, as a parent, and for your not that they're old, but for your parents. But tell me something. What more could Boris do?
Well, something that I think we can see, like, for example, I mean, one of the things that, I mean, the hospitals are overstretched as they are. Like, if you turn up a hospital, the doctors, I think, was it 9 in 1,600 people said the NHS could cope with this. So Boris keeps on saying we've got a fantastic NHS, etc. But they haven't got it. It is fantastic, except we haven't got the capacity for this. And I think that what would be a tangible thing that could happen is saying, right, this is what the plan is, because if people do get ill, because he's saying that, a fifth of people might be off work, so I think something like 14% of people who get this could become severely ill. I'm thinking, what are those numbers, and have we got beds for them? Where are they going to go? I mean, presumably, if they will, they're going to have to lie down somewhere. We're thinking, are we going to build a shelter somewhere? I mean, these are the things that I think are the sort of general organisational things that matter more than, we're going to get rid of that area.
Maybe behind the scenes, Sarah, they thought about it. Thank you for your call. That was Sceptical Sarah there. Sceptical Sarah from Purley. She's not completely convinced. I have to say, Sarah, I was a bit more convinced than you were, but thank you. Thank you for your call.
Thank you.
Margaret in Bolton says, I thought the PM was very impressive today. It was a smart move to have the two medical officers there, which, in my view, tempered the press from asking their usual loaded questions. I think the government are on top of this, but I feel sorry for people who could not get a lot of things as they can't afford them, says Mary. Well, yeah, and employment was raised by, Jeremy Corbyn was talking about sick pay in the House of Commons. Steve says to me, I'm self-employed. I make my living outdoor on large-scale summer events. If they're cancelled, I'm flumped. And Lawrence says, what about 0 hours workers? How can they self-isolate? We can't afford to. Lawrence, that point would apply to every single person who is a sole trader or self-employed in this country today. And we're talking about, 5, 6, maybe more million people. Elaine is a new caller from Bridgefoot in Cumbria. Good evening, Elaine.
Oh, hi, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. So, I mean, come on. Give Boris some credit. I mean, they have thought about it a bit, haven't they?
Do you know what? I think that the fact that he was flanked by two guys who really know quite what they're talking about, I think this government is probably behind the scenes working on quite a lot of things. I'm sure they are. And I have to say, I'm a bit with you. I think he did reasonably well. I don't have a lot of... He's a bit bumbly. He always has been. I don't expect Elaine, a lot else.
He did look a bit out of his depth on this subject, didn't he?
I think he's out of his depth on a lot of subjects, to be honest, Nigel, and I actually was pleased he became Prime Minister because of the alternatives, although I actually would like it to be you, in my honest opinion. But I think that the fact that we've got a system in place in this country, we're pretty on top of things, really. I suppose it's different for me. I live up in the Lake District. We're pretty isolated.
Lucky you.
Yeah, we are. But my mum's 84 and she's got a very low immune system, so I generally have to think about that. And my husband's, he's terminally ill as well, so it is a matter of just keeping clean and washing hands. And I actually don't think it would do anybody any favour by panicking. I think I agree with you. I think the economy is more of a concern.
Yes, and they appear to be.
Happens to people?
They appear to be very, very flat-footed on that. Certainly compared to what's happened in America today. And Elaine, I'll talk about that after the news at the bottom of the hour. Elaine, I'm with you. I think he did reasonably well. He was bumbling and stumbling a bit. I mean, look, he's not a scientist, and most questions he referred to the scientific officer and the medical officer. But I think he gave us at least they've done some planning, Elaine, haven't they?
Absolutely, and I mean there's a lot going on at the moment, isn't there? And I do, I do think that getting into a panic mode would not be very good.
No.
I did listen to your programme from last night because I'd missed it yesterday, and I know there's a guy that rang in from Whitehaven who was saying, "Oh yeah, definitely people aren't going." I work in retail; it's been extremely busy. I haven't noticed anybody up here particularly taking any notice. We've got more important things to think about.
Well, clearly, LBC is attracting a large Cumbrian following.
Well, why not? Why not?
No, you're the second Cumbrian caller in 2 days. Elaine, thank you very much indeed for your call and for your thoughts. Well, Elaine says it's still busy in Cumbria. I've got to tell you, folks, London is very quiet again today. That's just my little observation, not particularly scientific. Kathy says, I've got grandsons at school and they tell me lots of children there don't wash their hands. Teachers don't seem to care. They need to do something. Well, Kathy, they can listen to the Prime Minister because perhaps, I don't know, for the first time since World War II, we've got the government giving advice, telling us what to do. We're being told by the Prime Minister again and again and again, wash your hands and do it for as long as it takes to sing Happy Birthday. Or if you're a Jacob Rees-Mogg fan, it's the national anthem. This is the Nigel Farage Show at 6:30. Time for the news with Holly Jones.
The government's warning up to 1 in 5 workers in the UK.
News, NHS England has declared coronavirus a level 4 incident, which is the highest level of emergency. Well, that would indicate that the 51 cases that we know about, as confirmed by Matthew Hancock, the Health Secretary of the House of Commons today, is about to rise pretty sharply, I would have thought. Now, today is Super Tuesday. It's a big day in the USA, but there's also some quite big and really quite dramatic economic news coming out of the States as well. And joining me to talk about all of this is Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent, live from Washington, D.C. Simon, good afternoon to you.
And good evening to you, Nigel.
The quite dramatic economic news. Is this President Trump putting real pressure on the Fed?
Look, I think there's no question that President Trump, who has been very critical of the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, certainly put his thumb on the scale, which led to this announcement within the last few hours by the Fed. What they've done is they have cut by 0.5% the main interest rate here in the United States. It's called the federal funds rate. It's the first time that the Fed has taken this kind of action between its regularly scheduled meetings since 2008, and Jerome Powell in a statement indicated very clearly this is directly related to coronavirus and the impact that it's been having on markets, the uncertainty that it's created on Wall Street. He said that the central bank has judged that the risks to the US outlook have changed materially. In other words, he's saying that coronavirus poses a potential threat to the US economy. He made the point that the Fed recognizes that a rate cut will not reduce reduce the rate of infection. It won't fix a broken supply chain, he said. We get that, but we do believe that our action will provide a meaningful boost for the economy. Now, on Wall Street itself, it's not necessarily clear that the Fed has done enough, because within the last few minutes, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is off nearly 600 points, down 2.25% in value, and President Trump, within the last few hours, has taken to Twitter again, urging the Federal Reserve to do more. He says the Federal Reserve is cutting, but must further ease and, most importantly, come into line with other countries and competitors. He says he wants to see more easing and cutting. In other words, Donald Trump wants to see the Fed doing more to stimulate the economy. So that pressure point on Jerome Powell and the board of the Federal Reserve very much still there.
Yeah, very different situation here, where Mark Carney tells us that the Bank of England will give necessary support, and Boris Johnson says absolutely nothing. But it's Super Tuesday, and Bernie Sanders, now it looks like Joe Biden providing something of a real challenge.
Yeah, I think largely because Joe Biden has secured the endorsements of other moderates who were running for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination and who within the last 24 to 36 hours abandoned their campaigns. Namely, of course, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. They both made the 11th hour decision to pull their candidacies before Super Tuesday. And just to be clear, what is so super about this Tuesday? This is the moment at which the race for the presidency essentially goes national. Primary contests being held by the Democrats in 15 states and territories across the United States. So Joe Biden had a very lackluster start to his campaign, as you know, suffered terrible defeats in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, then bounced back last weekend in South Carolina. Today here is make or break for him. He's got to claw back some advantage and some territory against Senator Bernie Sanders, the socialist from Vermont, or Bernie Sanders will start looking absolutely unstoppable in his quest for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination. You know, Nigel, those Bernie Sanders supporters, they are fiercely loyal to him, and they believe that Hillary Clinton stole the presidential nomination from Bernie Sanders back in 2016. They do not want to see the Democratic elite coalescing around Joe Biden now and doing exactly the same thing in 2020.
Yeah, in fact, I'd call them fanatical, Simon. But they are true believers, just as, of course, Jeremy Corbyn had his own loyal support here in the Labour Party. And a natural disaster, tornadoes in Tennessee, Simon.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just looking. The death toll in Tennessee from these tornadoes has just been revised upwards to 19. 19 people killed as a result of tornadoes ripping through parts of Tennessee, including, of course, Nashville, very much the capital of American country music. President Trump planning, he says, to visit the scene towards the end of this week. And all sorts of federal aid, of course, will now be flowing in to Tennessee. But shocking events there, with now a substantial death toll in Tennessee, and President Trump again addressing that issue on Twitter and saying that he sends prayers and thoughts and, of course, federal support in the form of cash to the state of Tennessee so that it can begin the process of recovering from this event.
Simon, thank you. Come back tomorrow. We'll analyse the results of Super Tuesday. We'll see whether Bernie Sanders is unstoppable or whether Joe Biden is now mounting a real challenge. Thank you. Fascinating, isn't it? You know, a natural disaster in Tennessee, horribly 19 people killed. President Trump will be there on Friday. And there's a very different leadership style in this country to the one being adopted in America. You pay your money, you take your choice. Caroline from Milton Keynes says, Nigel, I work in a preschool. How do I work at home? Well, that's a very, very good point. And there are lots of people worrying about this. Lots of self-employed people also worrying about, forget natural disasters for a moment, forget the economy for a moment, but on coronavirus, do you feel reassured by what the Prime Minister has done? I'm off to Keith in Peckham. Keith, good evening to you.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Not at all.
No, I'm not. I didn't listen to his broadcast today because actually I was driving a tour bus in the West End. I'm not going to mention the name of the company.
Please.
But one of my colleagues got a phone call around about lunchtime, so he said, can you come back to the depot? We did. and the manager was there, and he said due to certain situation, the tourists are not now in London. So over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and they're looking at the forecast, and they've been in touch with hotels, there's no tourists, not to mention the actual people that get on the buses themselves, they're not there. People are not coming from overseas, not coming to London. So I lost my job today.
Oh, Keith, sorry, mate. That's very, very tough.
Thank you very much for that, Nigel. But when I hear Boris and other people saying this is not important, no, now, today, it's affected people's jobs.
The economic impact has hit you already.
Yes.
Keith,
you get tour buses that they have no people on board when they're going round, like I've seen today, there's no money coming in, so the company cannot keep you on.
Well, this is why thousands of flights, and it is actually thousands of flights, have now been cancelled because people aren't travelling. Up at Bicester in Oxfordshire, there's this big sort of retail store, and traditionally hordes of Chinese tourists go there and load up because they can buy the big name labels at not quite West End prices. That, I'm told, firsthand, has been deserted. And as you say, tourism, tour buses. Keith, I'm sorry, that's a very tough blow for you. And I have to say, one of the reasons, Keith, I did that package from America about the rate cuts that the president has really put.
I apologise for interrupting you.
No. I do think the government is ignoring the economics of this.
They are, jobs-wise especially. Jobs-wise especially. And companies can't employ people when they're not getting the revenue in.
No, Keith, you're right. This is having a real impact. Our commiserations. Thank you for your call. I'm off to Barbara, who's a new caller from Greenwich. Barbara, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Were you reassured by the PM?
Nigel, stop being a gentleman. You know there was nothing reassuring there. Myself, I do have a family member who has lots of medical needs, and after this, I'm completely scared, actually. When he was asked if he could shake hands, he completely said, yes, I can shake hands, anybody. But why can't you say you could shake hands, but remember to wash your hands? So that is not reassuring. And for telling people everywhere that everything is fine, it's gone, why can't you put maybe alcohol on the like buses or the train station? It's a starting point. Don't just tell people to go on with their business. It's a serious disease. And for people who are vulnerable, they are really, really scared.
Okay, so they're not. So, Barbara, your message is they're not doing enough.
No, they're just hiding behind whatever they're hiding, and I don't think they even understand. They grasp the whole illness. I don't think they are taking that much step to understand. Okay, Barbara. No, you sound very concerned by it. Thank you. And somebody else is Moira from Cheam, who says, as a transplant patient, I have no idea what to do. We are dismissed as those with existing health problems, as if we're expendable as long as the economy is okay. Meanwhile, panicking people have stockpiled every available hand cleaner apart from a few bars of soap. I cannot buy the hand wipes I need. Well, Moira, look, let me just say this. I don't think you're being written off as those with existing health problems, and clearly as a transplant patient, this is a very anxious time for you, and we understand that. But the basic big message from the Prime Minister is whatever happens, we can cope. And if you are somebody, not of advanced years, in reasonable health, this is no more fearful than catching an ordinary dose of the flu. And that is the reassurance the Prime Minister sought to give people on medical grounds today. On economic grounds, I'm not sure the government have even thought about it. This is the Nigel Farage Show. It's LBC at 6:46. Time for the news headlines with Holly Jones.
The government has released its Battleplan.
Talks about with the fact we're in the containment stage of all of this. He says we're prepared for all contingencies, including up to a fifth of people not being at work, but basically says it's all going to be okay. And then, just a few hours later, NHS England declare coronavirus a level 4 incident, which is the highest level of emergency. Not concern, but emergency. And I do wonder whether people listening to the Prime Minister's words and then seeing what the NHS have said will begin to ask themselves, are we being told the full truth? You see, I wouldn't blame them if they did. Gary says, I wouldn't normally say this, but Boris was a statesman this morning. Gary, I thought overall he did pretty well. But, as I say, the NHS a few hours later calling it level 4, highest level of emergency. Are we being told everything? I don't know. You tell me. Harry in Waltham Forest. Harry, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening. So, what did you make of the Prime Minister this morning?
Well, a bit like the curate said, I'm partially satisfied, but not totally.
Yeah, and then when you hear of the NHS England just a few hours later telling us it's a level 4 incident, a highest level of emergency, do the Prime Minister's words and then that statement, do they look rather contradictory in a way?
Indeed. This is the whole trouble. We keep getting two sources of information all the time, both conflicting. My main concern, though, is that aside from this emergency, we must learn the lessons from this virus outbreak for the future.
And what are the lessons, Harry? What are the lessons?
Well, the lessons are that we must react much faster and harder. The UK, EU and the World Health Organization, as soon as the news broke about China should have been quarantined.
What, the whole of China?
The whole of China.
And what about Chinese goods being shipped here and everything?
Well, there has to be some way to cleanse those on the way in.
But Harry, every single year there are different viruses that appear. I mean, if we quarantined as soon as a new virus appeared, I mean, we'd never do any business with anybody, would we?
Well, the main problem, as I see it, is that we've got two ways of farming here. We've got the domesticated animals, and if they're all farmed worldwide to a common standard of health and hygiene, you get a sick animal, you take it out of the food chain. But when you've got this bush meat from Africa and Asia, where no providence of any animal, it could be carrying anything, you eat it and you get it. That's got to be stopped.
Yeah, well, these are issues, and I mean, I know that China, look, I can't stand the Chinese communist dictatorship, but one of the things they are trying to do is to modernise China, and clearly food supply is a major area. Harry, I agree with that. Thank you. We're off to Bognor Regis to speak to Barbara. We've spoken before. Barbara, good evening.
Oh, good evening, Nigel.
Welcome.
I think whatever the government does, it's damned if they do and damned if they don't, and I don't think they actually know exactly what to do, because it's a new thing. But I just feel people can take responsibility for themselves, and I just feel it's a shame that businesses are going to be suffering because of people being frightened of what to me is not something to be quite so frightened about.
Barbara, I don't know whether you heard earlier on, we had a caller from Peckham who drives tour buses around London who lost his job today.
I did. It's terrible because, from what I've heard, it's a mild thing in most people if you're healthy.
Yes.
If your health is compromised, well, what about staying home for maybe just a couple of weeks or so and see what happens? If you can, if you're older, if you're younger, obviously it's difficult, and if you're working, but not to panic.
Well, isn't that the message that Boris Johnson was putting out today, effectively?
I think so.
He was trying to, clearly he hasn't got much scientific knowledge, and why should he, but he was trying to provide reassurance. And yet, Barbara, and I'm not going to get too hung up on this, but just a few hours later, the NHS tell us they've declared a level 4 incident, the highest level of emergency. What are we to think, Barbara?
I would just, personally, I would just take it with a pinch of salt, that.
Right, okay.
The number of people in the world who've actually been affected is quite small.
It is quite small, and just over 50 cases confirmed in the UK.
Yes.
Well, why would the NHS say this then?
I don't know.
No, nor do I, Barbara. Nor do I. Thank you. No, thank you for your call. Well, if anybody from the NHS is listening and wants to come and reassure us, or give Ian Dale a ring after the news at 7, tell us why. Why would you, at this moment, declare a level 4, which is the highest state of emergency? I really really don't know the answer to that. Kenneth says to me, I'm really sorry for the London tour bus driver, and I assume that others have lost their jobs too. Maybe that bloke Khan can help them out. After all, Khan's dad was a bus driver. I'm not sure that's very relevant, Kenneth. I really am not. I am going to go up to Liverpool to take my last caller of the evening, which is Vincent. Vincent, good evening.
Well, all right, Nigel, how are you?
I'm all right. So, were you impressed today with the Prime Minister?
I'll tell you what, he's made me feel safer. He said, don't shake hands, let on with your foot. What a genius that is. No one, just think of that. This fella's in the top drawer job. He said, I wouldn't shake hands. You can let on with your big toe. This is bizarre. The health service, British England, they haven't got a clue what it is, how it is, and it's as simple as that, isn't it?
So Vincent, you don't think the government have got a clue, do you?
Well, apart from that, how do you manage that? Of course they haven't. It'd be easy going to one jank in China and getting over it. No one has got England. Geniuses, people who studied in Oxford and Cambridge, have not got a clue.
They've got good degrees, but no common sense, Vincent, is your view. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we've just been talking to NHS England regarding reports they've declared coronavirus a level 4 incident. They say this is not new, and it's been the case for weeks. A level 4 incident gives the NHS certain powers to, for example, request neighbouring trusts to give assistance to trusts experiencing difficulties. It's all pretty unconvincing and all right when you're in any sort of crisis. News, whether it's in the right timeline or not, can get over-exaggerated. But I have to say that if a level 4 incident is the highest state of emergency, maybe they need some redefinitions. Either that or perhaps there's something we're not being told. I just don't know. Confused. I will be back tomorrow at 6 when we'll have the results of Super Tuesday, and maybe we'll know what the NHS are talking about. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. Next, it's Ian.
We will make America great again.